Thanks so much for staying with us here on News Talk. Bruce DuPois with you on this Monday. Lawmakers on Capitol Hill will vote next month on the deal that a large coalition of nations, the U.S. included, has negotiated with Iran regarding that country's nuclear program. The agreement has prompted a barrage of television ads. No doubt you've seen at least some of them, mostly against the deal. Fortunately, there's a new web tool to help you sort out what's real from what's not. University of Maryland professor Steve Kull joins us now with more on this. It's good to see you again. Welcome back.
Thanks for having me.
Great having you here. Do you think most people are, A, interested in the Iran nuclear agreement, and B, confused by just what some of the details are, just what the nitty-gritty of the deal is? Because there's so much out there. Some of it is contradictory, and therefore it can't all be true.
Yeah, clearly people are quite confused. In fact, when polls ask people, what is your view, or do you feel like you don't know enough to say, about half say that they don't know enough to say. It's a confusing issue. People are making all kinds of claims, so it's really their head is spinning. And we find, though, that also that the answers that people give are heavily influenced by even just a little bit of information that comes across through the poll question.
So talk about voice of the people, and talk about your efforts to help people not to try to bring them to a certain camp, but to understand the basics. What is simply in this thing?
Well, we've been working for more than 2 decades trying to improve the communication between the public and policymakers. And over the years, we found that people have a lot of misinformation. For example, a poll we did a long time ago, we asked, do you think we're spending too much or too little on foreign aid? And the majority said, oh, too much. And then we said, well, how much of the budget do you think goes to foreign aid? And the median estimate was 20% of the budget. We said, well, how much do you think it should be? Median response was, oh, how about 10%? And we said, well, how would you feel if it was 1%, which was the actual number? And most people thought that was just fine. There was no problem with that. So clearly there's serious misinformation. It's also very important for people to hear arguments pro and con.
Absolutely.
So that they really can hear and think through and deliberate, because maybe you just hadn't thought of some key angle on the issue.
So how does the web tool, the series of questions and the informational slides that you've created at Voice of the People, how was this tailored for the Iran nuclear discussion?
Right. Well, just as a general rule, we take people through this process called a policy-making simulation.
And we're doing it right now as you speak, so okay. Go right ahead.
Okay. And we first give people a briefing on the issue. We present the policy options. They hear pro and con arguments, and then ultimately they make their recommendations. And this whole process has been vetted with congressional staffers from both parties to say that, yeah, the briefing is fair and accurate, and the arguments, in fact, are the strongest arguments that are being made on both sides of the issue. So you can be really confident that you are getting a real good picture. You're getting the kind of picture that a member of Congress has. That's why we call it a policy-making simulation. We're trying to put you in the shoes of the policymaker.
Nice that you were able to work with the staffers and get a kind of bipartisan buy-in from them on some basic statements and basic facts, because like with the ads, they're always, and not just on this issue, but on so many of the issues that are big, that are heated, that are hot button issues, where there's a ton of money from who knows where floating around. And they all the groups, Americans for Apple Pie and Common Sense. You don't know, and it's unknowable, who these groups are, and if you don't know their biases and what their goal is, what their aim is, you can't sort of tease out, you can't judge the source.
Right.
You can't judge the source, so you can't judge the knowledge.
Right. You need to see the whole picture. You need to hear both sides of the issue. That way people can really deliberate. And what we found very interesting is that in most cases, when you present arguments pro and con, majorities find both sides convincing. They don't have highly crystallized views. They go, oh, yeah, that's a good point. And then you hear the other side, oh, that's a good point too. Oh, yep, that needs to be taken into account. So they go back and forth, and then in the end we say, okay, now you need to make your final judgment, your final recommendation. And you know, it's sometimes when you look at how they respond to the arguments, it's going to be hard to tell how they're going to what they're going to judge in the end is to be the best decision.
Backers of the Iran deal are pressing folks on the other side to say, if you don't like this, what's the alternative?
Right.
If we're not going to negotiate, if we're not going to try and arrive at a deal and then enforce that deal, what's your plan?
And that's what we explore here. We look at what the alternative is. And the primary alternative that has been proposed has been ramp up sanctions, put greater pressure on Iran to completely give up its uranium enrichment program. That's the core argument. And that's complicated because it means us putting sanctions on other countries that are dealing with Iran, because we've already cut off our trade. So that there are political complications, and people need to understand those ins and outs, and they do as they go through this process. There are problems in the deal too. There are vulnerabilities in the deal, and so that makes and people need to hear about those as well before they come to their final conclusion.
A lot of the ads, and they're at near saturation level, depending on what channels you're watching and at what time of day you're watching, but the ads are out there in significant number. They're hammering this idea that the regime in Tehran has proven they can't be trusted. Why would you embark on a deal? Why would you accept an arrangement where trust is is baked into the cake?
Yeah. Well, see, those kinds of interventions are trying to elicit fear, not necessarily reasoning. The founder said it is the reason of the people that should govern, not emotions, not passions.
But who you're dealing with should inform, and their history should, I think, is fairly germane.
Absolutely.
It's not to say that it sways the argument independent of everything else. But I don't think it would be wise to disregard it entirely. It's got to be in the mix.
Right, and we inform them about how Iran has violated agreements in the past, what those vulnerabilities are, and we also consider what the nature of the inspection regime is. The whole idea is that there will be these intrusive inspections, so that the program can be closely monitored. All of the nuclear sites will be continuously monitored, and other sites can be monitored at request, which of course raises questions about what might happen if we can't get in there immediately. And so all of these issues are taken into account, need to be taken into account in this discussion. This
is not a deal that the U.S. brokered with Iran. This is a deal that a large international coalition, countries who on most issues don't agree on the time of day or the day of the week, the president making the case that if we turn our backs on this deal, we are isolating ourselves on the world stage, because so many people, so many nations were involved and have signed on.
Yes, and that's a part of the challenge now is, can we walk it back now that this agreement has been made between all of these countries? Is the U.S. really in a position? So that's a new set of questions that is now emerging, and as when we try to consider what the alternatives are at this point.
Do we know anything, and maybe this is something you've looked at, maybe it's not, but these groups with, again, the generic names, we really don't know who they are. I don't think it's necessarily discernible. We don't know where their money comes from. Do we know what is undergirding this well-financed pushback?
Well, there are some groups that are explicitly saying that they're behind these organizations, but I don't think really that's so much the point. I mean, if they make a reasonable case, that case needs to be heard. The opposite cases need to be heard as well. I don't think that it's intrinsically problematic that their arguments are being pushed out. I do think it's important for people to have a place to go where they can put it all together, see both sides of the issue, get accurate information, and come to some kind of conclusion, and that's what our idea is at Voice of the People.
VOP.org?
Yeah, if you go to VOP.org and you push the button that says Policymaking Simulations, you can try these simulations out yourself.
Tell us about the project broadly.
Well, the idea is to give the people a greater voice in government, but to give people a voice that is informed. So we get a representative sample of Americans in specific states and districts. We have one in Virginia and Maryland and Oklahoma, as well as nationwide. We call these citizen cabinets. And these people agree to go through these processes regularly. So it's a representative sample just like you would have in every survey. And they go through these processes, these policymaking simulations. These are aggregated, and then these views are communicated to their members of Congress so the members can know really what their constituents feel on these issues.
And as we always hear, lawmakers tend to perk up and take notice disproportionately on the issues where people are making their voice heard. So for folks who think their voice doesn't matter, they should think again.
Right. Well, the beauty of the policy-making simulations is that anybody and everybody can go online and formulate their conclusions and send them off to their member. There's also a scientifically selected sample, a citizen cabinet, that's representative that goes through the process as well.
Professor Steve Kull of the University of Maryland. Good to see you again. Thanks very much for your time. The timing for this discussion is good because, as we mentioned at the outset, lawmakers come back, vote on this issue early in September. Thanks again very much for your time.
You're welcome.
We're back with more News Talk right after this.